Aha! So, part 25, and let's move on. So we kind of finished this top row here, and so the next one to do is this View All button. Now, the first thing I want to do is slightly rename that because it doesn't really tell me what it does. So let's just change it to All Stock, which is kind of better. And yeah, so when we click this button, we just basically want a form showing all of our stock and pretty much all of the details, so that we could edit anything if we want, or just look at it, or yeah, just so that it's there, so we don't have to open up the stock table, which we won't be able to do because we won't have access to it. So I'm very quickly going to create a form, and it's going to be a multiple items form. And yeah, that's essentially it for a second. Now it goes way off the side of the page because there's quite a few fields. So I'm just going to reformat this a bit so it's a little bit more pleasing on the eye, and I'll be back. Right, so made some changes. Basically just rejiggled it about so it all kind of fits on a nice screen width, which means I still need quite a lot of info in here, and some of these fields like the notes could be quite long. Probably have to revisit the formatting of this, but anyway, I've split it over two lines. The most important probably thing that I want to see on here is the remaining quantity, so that's in a big box by itself. Got the is empty checkbox, and I've reduced the size of the stock ID and the stock ingredient ID, and probably end up removing those completely once finished developing it. I've also added a close button, which just closes the form. So let's have a little look at that, and yeah, there it is. So that's basically all of our stock. We can go in and edit anything we like, and blah blah blah, and we can close. I'll save it. So the last thing I need to do is just to tie that button to open that form, which is going to be simple. I'll do that and be back right in a second. Yeah, there we go, and this is it. So in the on-click handler for the button, I've just, basically called the function that I created yesterday or the day before, which is the sort of centralized public function to open forms. That's the name of the form. I don't need to pass any criterion. I don't need to pass any arguments because the form is just opening up as it is. So we'll close that and we shall run this. We'll click the All Stock button, and there it is. So that's that for a minute. Let me just update this to show that we have finished that button, and we change that to, what do we change that to? Border width goes to 6 points. View it again. There we go. So moving on to the next button, adjust stock. Well, what would happen is I'd select one of these stocks. In fact, before that, I want the stock here isn't great because it's just showing the ingredient name, and really as a stock item it should show the actual bottle ID. So I'm going to update that a sec, and I'll be back. And there we go. As if by magic, these now have the underscore with the order ID tagged on the end, so these are references to bottles, not ingredients, which is better. So where was I? Yes, what we would do is we would select one of these, and we would either want to adjust the stock, which basically means adding some or taking it away, where, or correcting it I should say, really, where the what's left in the bottle doesn't actually reflect what the tool's calculated. If there was a bit more in there to begin with or a bit less, then the calculations may work out to be a mil or two out, and we'll need to adjust that. So that's what that button's going to do. This button will obviously delete that stock item, so we'll get to that in a sec. So let's look at adjust stock. Now what I want to do, and I'm not going to do that this time around, but what I eventually want to do is to have these adjustments in a separate table, so that basically I can review, go back over and see for a bottle the adjustments I've made to it. But for the quick and dirty method just now, basically this form here gives us access to the amount that we bought and the amount that's left, so we could just change those there. And that really is good enough for now, but in the future I'd really like to be able to not do that, so I can actually look back and see what adjustments I've made by changing it here. That the information's lost, and we can probably sort of more or less gather by the fact that if we bought 200 and we've used 203, then at some point we've probably added 3 in, but that's a bit iffy. So yeah, I'd really rather have that all sort of logged in a separate table, but not necessary for this run through. So essentially all I'm going to do is use that all stock table like this one on here, but for a specific bottle, and then just add some little controls on there to be able to quickly adjust the stock level. So I'm going to do that now. So that's done. If we select an ingredient, let's oh not an ingredient, a what do you call them now? An item of stock. Yeah, that's the one. Let's do almond underscore 15. Click the adjust stock. So basically we have pretty much the same form that we have here, but obviously it's now just filtered down to show us the particular one that we requested, ignoring the new one down at the bottom. We'll get to that when we tidy all this up. We'll remove any new record creations from the form. So essentially we just got that bit there, and you can see what I've added in is this little green area down here. So essentially that allows us to decrement the remaining amount, and that's the remaining amount there. So at the moment we've got 7 mil left, or we can increment the remaining amount. So if I say decrement it, I can just click that and it's going to decrement it by 1, and it's automatically populated that. But if I wanted to decrement it by, let's say 5, and then I could put a 5 in there and decrement that by 5, and it goes down to 1, and we can do the same, increment by 5 or 1 or 3 to get 10, and take that away equals 1, and when it goes to 0, it goes to 0 and checks the is empty thingy. And if we increment it, it takes away the is empty thing, obviously. So yeah, let's take that down to 0, and let's have a little look at exactly what's going on here. Fairly obviously I've just created a sort of green background for this area just to sort of bring it out as an area of interactivity. I've created the 2 buttons, which we'll get around to the code in a minute, and I've created a it's actually a bound field here. Now we don't really need to store this data at all, but the problem is that with multi item forms, continuous forms where you've got more than one record, anything that's not bound will be the same on each one. So if we change this to 1, they'll all change to 1, and I don't really want that. I just want it to be working on the one we're doing. So what I've done, and if we just close this a second and close that, open up the stock table, yeah, and go right to the end, I've basically added a column called stock working data, which is just an area to put nonsense. It's literally an area to put stuff in that we just temporarily need to frig about to get things to work. I don't really want to ever end up seeing anything in here, so once we finish using it, I intend to sort of clean it up so nothing ever actually gets stored in here, or rather nothing gets stored in here permanently, just on a temporary basis while we work with that data. Yeah, we'll save the changes. So yeah, let's select wherever we were, that one, and go into here. So yeah, so basically we're just using that table to temporarily store how much we want to increment or decrement the remaining quantity by. So if we have a look now at the on-click handler for the decrement remaining button, wherever it's gone, why isn't it opening? There we go. So here's the on-click handler for the decrement remaining button, and basically the first thing it does is it tests to see what's in this box here. If it's null, or it isn't a number, which shouldn't really happen, or it's less than or equal to 0, then we basically make it equal to 1. So that means that if we're just incrementing by 1, we don't need to type a 1 in, we can just press one of the buttons and it'll do it by itself, and not error, more importantly. So then it basically just does some calculations. It says, you know, it works out whether there's going to be 0 stock left, sets the is empty flag to true or not, and does that and does that. The increment button, oh sorry, that was a decrement button, but the increment button is more or less the same. It's a bit easier because we don't need to test to see if it's going to 0. So it does the same sort of thing, but just adds whatever's in that box to it. And also obviously just make sure that that tick box is not empty, because if we're adding something to the stock, then it can't be empty anymore, can it? So the only other thing that I've added to this form is a before update. So basically, before all of this data is recorded in the table for the record, I set that value there to null so that it never gets stored in the database. And that keeps everything pretty clean. So let's close that, save it, yes. So essentially we can do the same thing, viewing all if we like, or we can go into the one particular one and yeah, do that there. So that kind of deals with my adjust stock button. So I will take the opportunity to change the format of that, and where are we? Call it, oops, no, not that. 6 points, and call it done. Watching paint dry would be more interesting.